This turning is going to last until about the year 2030, so we're not quite halfway through yet. Well, this is all part of a pattern, and it's a pattern that's gone back centuries in Anglo-American history. I think it frankly characterizes the history of many countries around the world today. Like nature's four seasons, the cycles of history follow a natural rhythm or pattern. Over the last 5 centuries, Anglo-American society has entered a new era, a new turning, every 2 decades or so. At the start of each turning, people change how they feel about themselves, the culture, the nation, and the future. Turnings come in cycles of 4. Each cycle spans the length of a long human life, roughly 80 to 100 years, or the unit of time the ancients called the saeculum. The first turning is called a high. This is an era when institutions are strong and individualism is weak. Society is confident about where it wants to go collectively, even if those outside the majoritarian center feel stifled by the conformity. America's most recent first turning was the post-World War II American high, beginning in 1946 and ending with the assassination of John Kennedy in 1963. The second turning is an awakening. This is an era when institutions are attacked in the name of personal and spiritual autonomy. Just when society is reaching its high tide of public progress, people suddenly tire of social discipline and want to recapture a sense of inner authenticity. Young activists and spiritualists look back at the previous high as an era of cultural poverty. America's most recent awakening was the consciousness revolution, which spanned from the campus and inner city revolts in the mid-1960s to the tax revolts of the early 1980s. The third turning is an unraveling. The mood of this era is in many ways the opposite of a high. Institutions are weak and distrusted, while individualism is strong and flourishing. Highs follow crises, which teach the lesson that society must coalesce and build. Unravelings follow awakenings, which teach the lesson that society must atomize and enjoy. America's most recent unraveling was the long boom in culture wars beginning in the early 1980s and probably ending in 2008. The era opened with triumphant morning in America individualism and drifted toward a pervasive distrust of institutions and leaders, an edgy popular culture, and the splitting of national consensus into competing values camps, red and blue. And finally, we enter the fourth turning, which is a crisis. This is an era in which America's institutional life is torn down and rebuilt from the ground up, always in response to a perceived threat to the nation's very survival. Civic authority revives, cultural expression finds a community purpose, and people begin to locate themselves as members of a larger group. In every instance, fourth turnings have eventually become new founding moments in America's history, refreshing and redefining the national identity. Currently, this period began in 2008 with the global financial crisis and the deepening of the war on terror, and will extend to around 2030. So what does all this say about our future? Well, in our paradigm, America has entered the fourth turning. What can we say about fourth turnings? Each turning lasts around 22 years, so this turning is going to last until about the year 2030. So we're not quite halfway through yet. Now, this is the winter of history. It's a time of creative destruction of public institutions. We're going to radically change, ultimately, when we get out the other end of this thing, our politics, our economics, our sense of what we need in terms of public infrastructure in our lives. And very much of that is going to be shaped by the values and aspirations of the rising millennial generation. What do we know of the morphology of these turnings? Well, it starts with the catalyst. And of course, the catalyst was, like 1929, it was 2008. A sudden shock to our system. Say, okay, we're in a new place now. You know, we're not in Kansas anymore. We have a whole new sense of where we need to go as a nation. We suddenly shocked out of our third turning individualism, celebrity circuses, and whatever we thought about back then. Things are going to be different now. Families are suddenly aware that they're not going to do as well as their parents. We're suddenly see that our role in the world maybe is not what we expected. That's the first thing. And that's already happened. The other 3 phases of the fourth turning haven't happened yet. One, which will soon happen, is what we call the regeneracy. This is when distrust reaches its low point and we suddenly begin to coalesce around something, some leader, some movement, we began to feel positive about as a fulcrum, as some point at which we can begin to find increasing trust in someone who can piece together institutions that can make sense again. Additional shocks to our system, either in terms of economic, financial, or geopolitical shocks, are on the table. This is what happens in a fourth turning because at this moment of great vulnerability, we're going to hit further points at which we realize we are unprepared for the future. A lot of the assumptions we're making actually aren't going to pan out. We need to retool our institutions in a much more fundamental way than we've seen thus far. That's exactly what happened in the 1930s, where we kind of ratcheted down our expectations and retooled things in a bigger and bigger way than FDR ever thought going in 1932 that he would ever have to do. That's where we're going to go. And that's going to lead to what we call the crisis. That's the third point in a fourth turning, when suddenly things get worse and worse, but we're beginning to match it with greater and greater civic effort. We're rebuilding our civic life to match this greater and greater sense of crisis. Then we reach the crisis and pass it, and then that leaves the final act in a fourth turning, and that's what we call the resolution. That's when the treaties are signed, the negotiations are made, all of the civic cement, which was wet during the fourth turning, suddenly dries. And then we suddenly have a post-crisis order, which hopefully would endure a beneficial and working post-crisis order that we hopefully will endure for the next 2 or 3 turnings after that. The final point I want to make is this, is that people talk about fourth turnings, and I've been quoted in the media this way, that they're just bad, they're apocalyptic, they're horrible for all of us. And I just want to make the point that fourth turnings are actually necessary, just like winter is necessary. Winter kills everything off so that new things can grow. And just as forests need fires, rivers need floods, so does society need events which clean out the debris, which clean out everything that's sclerotic and ossified that no longer functions. Something which tilts the whole playing field of power and wealth from the old back to the young. This is what fourth turnings do. They renew us. Fourth turnings are the price we must pay for a new golden age. History has shown this time after time, and we're about to see it again in what I expect to be a really interesting and fascinating period in our history with which we can truly be all engaged.